right, so thank you all for coming tonight on a Sunday night. I don't know what just happened there.
Sorry.
And thank you to the authors for showing up. This is the kickoff of the 10th annual New York City Teen Author Festival, which will have, before a week from now, over 110 authors in over 12 locations. And it's just really exciting. Many of these authors will be doing other things as well, but I'm glad you came tonight for the kickoff. I will say up front, the website is nyctaf.com, which has the whole schedule, so I always forget to do that at the end, so I'm doing it now at the beginning. So everybody was introduced and your book titles were there, so I was going to follow up with your name and your book title, but it's all there. But we'll just do the refresher course here. So we have Richard. Hold up your book. So they know which one to buy. That's his cover. Arvin. All right. Susane. Ashley.
My friend just gave me this jacket.
Exactly. Who now has an official copy. Krystal. All right. Dana. And Sara. All right, so now you have just seen the covers. You've met the authors, sort of. So what we're going to do is we're not breaking the mold with this one. It's going to be all interpretive dance, which I think is amazing. I just saw the rehearsal. It was really stunning. The pyrotechnics, I'm not sure that we have the zoning for that, but we'll see. But no, we are going to. Each of the authors is going to read sort of a brief snippet from their novel to give you a taste of it, so you'll run out to the bookstore and buy multiple copies for yourself, all your friends, your grandparents, whoever really will love it. And then after they're done, I will ask them just hard-hitting questions that will really just expand our knowledge of the universe, if not literature. Then we'll open it up to questions from you. I will blather on for about a minute asking for questions so that people will raise their hands. Then I will be grateful when you raise your hands, and we'll have the conversation expand that way. And then we will sign a lot of books that you will buy at the Strand, which is like the best bookstore in the entire world. So it's great to be here, right? I mean, like, we're all like, wow, we're at the Strand. This is really cool. All right, so we didn't have all right, so are you the type of person who prefers to go last or go first?
I can go first.
All right, can you get it over with? All right, so here we go, starting with Richard.
All right. But, we don't need to give context or anything, right? People can figure it out. Yeah. Okay, so this is about 5 kids at a hospital after a bridge collapse in Boston, and this is kind of like early stages when they're just getting to know each other and figure out. And the book also goes back into a lot of backstory, flashback stuff, so this is kind of a scene that mixes the two a little bit. So tell me about your boyfriend, Morgan said, offering him the cigarette again. He took it, pulled on it, thought for a second. Jason felt a sudden closeness to Morgan, the way she set him at ease, talked to him like a person instead of a collection of disappointments. He wanted to tell her about everything that happened after that first kiss on the beach, about the next kiss on the porch after Alexa had gone to bed, and the next one, and the next one, in places he couldn't remember anymore. He wanted to tell her about how he had said, "I love you," while he and Kyle were driving to Provincetown, their first and only time going there together. The way Kyle had said nothing at first, only reached out his hand, the other hand loosely on the steering wheel, and ran it through Jason's hair. How Jason had felt so seen and known and safe and alive just then. He wanted to tell Morgan about the first time he and Kyle had sex, awkward and giggling in Jason's bed one night after drinking a bottle and a half of Linda's wine. He wanted to tell her about how Kyle fell asleep first afterward, and Jason lay there listening to him breathing, running a finger along Kyle's freckled back, wanting to eat him alive, to absorb him through his skin, to bury himself under Kyle's armpit or behind his knee. He wanted to tell Morgan about all the bad things, too, about how melodramatic and petty Kyle could be, about how much he lied about trivial things, about how he sometimes treated his and Jason's secret like a weapon or a threat to get something he wanted or to guilt Jason into indulging his fantasies for a little while longer. Jason would sometimes get annoyed hearing about all the wonderful things Kyle was going to do in New York, because as much as they were consumed with each other then, those future plans never quite seemed to involve Jason. He would tell Kyle that, and Kyle would frown, his eyes darkening a little bit, and then with a sinister breeziness in his voice, he would say, "Well, if I can't talk to you about that, maybe I should talk to Alexa about us, or to your parents about us." And Jason would give him a little shove and say, "Fuck off." Jason wanted to tell Morgan about the fight that he and Kyle had when the summer was fading and the real world loomed on the horizon. He wanted to tell Morgan how sorry he was, how he'd do things differently if he could. He didn't tell her any of that, though. Instead, he just took another drag off Morgan's cigarette and said, "You would like him." She smiled, friendly but lined with sadness, shivering in her sweatshirt, pale under the streetlights.
All right, Arvin, do you want to? We'll just go down the row.
Yeah. It's on. Amazing.
It's on.
It's on. All right. So my book is Down and Across. It's about a boy, Scott, who is a chronic quitter and has no idea what he's going to study in college and what he's going to do in life in this world where people just want you to decide. So he runs away from home and he runs away to meet this professor, Cicely Mallard, who is an expert, who's an expert on grit. And she, this is his first day in DC. She wants nothing to do with him. So he ends up getting drunk that night for the first time with this girl, Fiora, who he met on the bus. "Cobble," I slurred. We were back on the street where my bike chase had happened the day before, and I chuckled. "Sunderland Place is very cobbly." "It's not cobble, it's brick," Fiora said. My first alcoholic drink ever, and my second, and my third. I couldn't believe how it happened, where it happened, with whom it happened. It was dark outside. The shades of black and gray and dusky charcoal spun before my eyes. Nighttime befuddled my senses. My feet were floating along. I was too buzzed to feel anything but good. "It's cobble," I asserted. "Brick, socket. Cobble is a sedimentary rock you find in pebble form." "Cobble," I repeated. "Cobble, cobble, cobble, cobble." Fiora laughed. "Now it just sounds funny. The more you say it, the funnier it sounds." Funny. That was a pretty funny word. I wanted to say it again. Funny, 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 funny. Stop it. You're stealing all the words. We reached the end of the street. Instead of turning, Fiora grabbed me by the shoulders and looked me straight in the eyes. "Socket," she said in a very play-serious tone, "I think you're drunk." I always thought my first time getting drunk would feel momentous, like I would savor every sip and wear a permanent grin from ear to ear. In fact, yes, I was grinning, but I think that was from the alcohol, not the fact that I just drank alcohol for the first time. The actual drinking part had been weirdly casual. I didn't think much of it, and I certainly wasn't thinking that a few drinks would get me plastered. "So what's your plan?" Fiora asked. "Well, Fiora, it's funny that you should ask. I'm going home tomorrow." I tripped over my own ankle somehow and nose planted into Fiora's shoulder. I shouldn't be allowed to get drunk, ever. "What happened with that grit professor?" "Puffa," I said, unleashing a spray of spit. "She wouldn't even talk to me. I'll never be gritty. No grit material here. Grit, shit. Maybe if I say it enough times, I'll ruin that word, too. Grit, grit, grit." Fiora cupped her hand over my mouth. "Shush. That's the most ironic wimp out ever. Tell me, what exactly is grit?" I sobered up a little. Perseverance and passion for long-term goals? Exactly. So go back. Don't let one pathetic no push you away from something you care about. Believe me, if I did, I wouldn't be writing crossword puzzles or still in a relationship or... Fiora's words trailed off. That's the whole point of grit, right? I stared past Fiora at a red hexagonal sign that said stop. Yes, I was so drunk that it took me a few seconds to piece together the color, shape, and letters of a regular old stop sign. Everything around me was spinning again for the second time that day. I whispered to the sign, "Fuck you. I'm not stopping." "What?" Fiora said. No, not you. I was talking to... What time is it?" "I don't know, midnight?" "Shut up." Fiora pulled out her phone. "What? Look, it's 12:23 a.m. "Let me see that." I snatched the phone from her hand. She was wrong. 12:24 a.m. It was Wednesday. Professor Mallard held office hours on Wednesdays from 8 to 10 a.m. I had to stay gritty about grit. That was the point. I'd do exactly what she wanted me to do, even if it was the opposite of what she told me in her office. The reality of my recklessness hit me like a ton of bricks. Fiora had distracted me. I handed her the phone back and took off without so much as a goodbye. I shouted far too many expletives, far too loudly and publicly as I sprinted down New Hampshire and back to the hostel and made it into my bed somehow because it was all a blur after 12:24 a.m.
Hey, well, this is Forever in Love is the final book of my City Love trilogy, and it's the only trilogy I've written, and probably the only one I will write. This is about three girls sharing a Manhattan apartment the summer before college begins. And old school West Village apartments are both historical and hilarious. I saw over 100 of them when I was looking for my apartment in the West Village, and because that's how many I had to see to find the needle in the haystack. I saw I call it a Lego fort. It was literally an extra apartment that a landlord just took a hodgepodge of destroyed, burnout appliances that people had discarded throughout the years. He plunked them down on top of a roof, 5-story walk-up building, and he's like, oh, we'll just make it a 6-floor walk-up. And he threw some walls around it and slapped a door on it, and it is currently renting for $4,500 a month. So in this scene, Sadie is helping Austin look for an apartment in this neighborhood of the West Village, which this actually features another of the gems that I saw pretty much word for word. Yeah, no, you can't live here. Why not? Because it's disgusting. Austin looks around the deteriorating apartment. It's not that bad. I gawk at him incredulously. There are no words for how bad this apartment is. When Austin asked me to look for an apartment with him, I assumed he wouldn't be putting grungy bachelor pads on the list. I understand he has a budget. I understand rents in the West Village are outrageous. But there has to be a better place than this within his price range. There is no way I can let him live here. Did you see the bathtub in the kitchen? I ask. Those old clawfoot tubs are vintage. They don't make them like that anymore. They don't make them like that anymore for a reason. Austin smirks at me. I think it's charming. And I think you should take showers in the bathroom. I stalk over to the bathtub sitting right out on the kitchen floor between the stove and the refrigerator. The other side of the refrigerator is almost touching a couch in the tiny space Austin's broker, Maxine, keeps insisting is a living room. You can watch TV and get a cold drink from the refrigerator without having to get up. Sorry, but it doesn't qualify as a living room if you can reach into the kitchen from the couch. I glare at the bathtub. Is this even hooked up to anything? What, do you just like pour water in it and sit there? How do you even take a shower in this? There's no rod, or where's the shower curtain? Maxine, a rumpled girl who doesn't look much older than us, speaks up. You don't take showers in the tub. She indicates a rickety accordion partition on the wall, yellowed with age. When she opens the partition, a narrow shower stall is revealed. The shower is so constricted, you couldn't even turn around in it. Seriously? I blurt. I know Maxine is just doing her job, but come on. Where's the bathroom? Austin asks. This unit doesn't include a traditional bathroom, Maxine spins. But it has a toilet, right? Of course, Maxine points to a small set of 3 stairs leading up to a raised platform just inside the front door. A paisley sheet is tacked along the top edge, hiding whatever is back there. I thought it was a pantry when we came in. Austin turns to me. I'm starting to see your point. Are you gonna look behind the curtain? I mean, nasty old sheet? He lifts the sheet aside. Perched in a cubbyhole is a toilet all by itself. A roll of toilet paper sits on the floor. A plunger is wedged behind the toilet. Yeah, so I'm gonna pass on this. Austin grins at Maxine. You said there's another unit to look at? Not in this building? Oh my God. I made the mistake of opening the cabinet under the sink. Chunks of plaster have fallen off the wall around the pipes. Whoever lives here didn't even bother to sweep up the broken pieces of crumpled plaster or fill the gaping hole in the wall. An array of roach traps indicates that indoor wildlife is an imminent threat to whomever dares rent this apartment.
Hi, everyone. My book is The Beauty That Remains, and there are 3 different narrators in this book. So right now, I'm going to be reading from Logan. I guess the important thing you need to know about him before I start reading is he is a songwriter. He is really upset about his ex having died recently, and he's kind of in denial about it. So here we go. I guess when you lock your mother out of your room for a solid half hour while you blast angry music and drink your dad's expensive stolen booze, you're not exactly a picture of mental health. So it's no surprise that I'm sitting in a shrink's office right now. I take out my phone to check Bram's channel for new comments and to look at the Battle of the Bands leaderboard, something I do every now and then. Obviously, my unnamed, drummerless band isn't on it, but before I even type a word, I slip the phone right back into my pocket because I'd forgotten that none of my apps work. My parents canceled my data, so the only thing my phone is good for now is texting, or talking, or trying to fix that same damn song because I don't have any new ideas. I have a text from Aiden that I don't really want to answer, so I look at the shrink. I don't want to talk to her, but I know if I refuse to say anything here, I won't get my data back. The psychiatrist has tiny pale green eyes and a nose that's a little too big for her face. But she's young and healthy looking, one of those people who could model because her features are so originally arranged. I don't know how to describe it exactly. She's not beautiful, not even close, but something about her face is striking. Anyway, her name is Gertrude Stein, like the writer, and she has a similarly bad haircut. Her hideous shoes and brown sweater make me sad. Wasted potential, if you ask me. So, Logan, Gertrude says. Trudy, I say back. She cringes a little and says, gross. I kind of grin because I was not expecting Gertrude to say gross. Only my grandmother calls me that. You can call me Dr. Stein, or Gertrude, obviously. I smile again. Okay, Trudy, I say. She looks down at her notebook and doesn't acknowledge me repeating the name. It bugs me a little that it doesn't seem to bug her. Your mother tells me that you're here to talk about someone you lost pretty suddenly around Christmas. And I wanted to start by saying I'm so incredibly sorry for your loss. Would you like to tell me about him? I hate every second of this, but her casual mention of my mom isn't lost on me. I wonder if she meant it as the thinly veiled threat it came across as. I look right at her. What else did my mom tell you? I ask, frowning. Just that you seem to be having some trouble dealing with what's happened. She smiles. I'm only here to help, Logan. I let my eyes roam around her office. Then I stand up, walk to the window, and squint at the tiny people 18 floors and a fancy-ass lobby away from me. I watch a plane disappear into the clouds while I fiddle with a thin string of my hoodie. I flip up the hood, then yank the strings tight. When I turn around, the fabric is over my eyes, but I can feel that the shrink is still watching me. She probably thinks she's hot shit in her swanky Manhattan office. I loosen and lower my hood. I run my finger along the windowsill and I make a big fuss about the city grime and dust that's there, but you'd never notice it if you were sitting on the leather sofa. She writes something down. I stick my hand into my pocket and tap the surface of my useless phone. I sigh, feeling stuck. Well, I start. He was my ex, the guy who died.
Hi guys, I'm Krystal Sutherland and my book is a semi-definitive list of worst nightmares. Basically this is about a girl called Esther Sola who believes her family has been cursed by death to each suffer a great fear in their lifetime. And whatever they fear will eventually kill them. So her father is agoraphobic and hasn't been out of the basement for 6 years. Her brother is afraid of the dark and her mom is scared of bad luck. But she doesn't know what her great fear is yet. She keeps a list of 50 things to be avoided at all cost. But in order to try and break the curse, she decides she's going to face her 50 fears. And she goes out every week for a year and faces one of them. So I'm going to read you a short excerpt of her facing her 9th fear, which is geese. On the Sunday of Fear 9, before Jonah could even ask, Esther held up her hand and explained to him why she avoided geese. A. Canada geese brought down the plane that crashed into the Hudson River. And B. Geese are generally just terrible, horrible, satanic beasts. For once, he said, pulling his oven mitts out of his backpack and taping them around his wrists, I agree with you. He looked her up and down, taking in her stormtrooper armor. I bought you gloves and goggles, but it doesn't look like you'll need them. I have battled a goose before, she said, as she put on her helmet, praying to the great pit of Carcoon that it would be enough to protect her from being mangled. I will not meet them unprepared again. You ready? He asked. For geese? Her voice was muffled and her breath was warm against her face, but she didn't care, because geese. No, let's go. They walked to the park near her house, where the local geese were made of beaks and hatred. The pond had been cordoned off for the better part of a decade, ever since the birds tried to maul a small child to death. There were signs pegged into the lawn everywhere that read, Warning, aggressive geese. They were about to die. Geese are the only birds to have killed a man, Esther said, as Jonah strapped his GoPro to his forehead. That's not true, he said. A goose locked eyes with her and hissed, even though they were 50 feet away. I'm pretty sure it's true. They're ready for us. Jonah crossed himself and took a breadstick out of his backpack. They nodded at each other in understanding that this may very well be the end. This is how Esther saw it in her head. An establishing shot, her and Jonah on one side of the screen, the goose horde on the other, as they marched towards the birds, as the tune of Karl Orff's epic O Fortuna played in the background. They began running, so did the geese. There were battle cries from each side. Jonah held up the breadstick and screamed, For humanity! Then a sweeping aerial shot showing the armies about to collide and how the two mammalian warriors were vastly outnumbered. A close-up of her stormtrooper helmet, a close-up of a goose's face, its expression bloodthirsty, aka resting goose face. And then the shot this had all been building toward, their armies meeting in the middle of the screen, two tsunamis slamming into each other, feathers flying everywhere as the geese set upon them. Back to reality. Esther lost Jonah in the carnage, but she heard him scream, Take the bread, you sons of bitches! Just take the bread! The birds were everywhere, snapping at her plastic suit, trying to find the weaknesses in her armor. They were hissing madly, necks outstretched, wings flapping wildly, as they tried to decide whether to eat the breadstick or murder the intruders or both. There are too many of them! Retreat! Retreat! Esther yelled. That's when a goose bit Jonah's ankle and brought him down. He screamed and collapsed in a heap, his chest and arms exposed to the fury of a dozen beaks. Go on without me, he said between goose bites. Go on without me! That's a negative, Ghost Rider. Emboldened by adrenaline, Esther dove into the demon bird tornado and grabbed Jonah under the arms. But the geese were fast and knew how to hold a grudge. So even though she dragged him halfway across the park, they still followed, hissing and biting and flapping like some symphony of evil. The geese finally decided they were far enough away from their territory and went dead still on the lawn, centuries waiting for the duo to regroup and strike again. Esther dropped Jonah and sank to her knees, heaving breaths inside her helmet. She yanked it off, and then her gloves, so she could tear open Jonah's shirt to check for injuries. He was moaning and writhing on the ground, mumbling over and over, I can't feel my legs. There were 3 blood blisters on his shoulder and a dozen on his ankles and legs where the geese got their beaks into him. But apart from that, she couldn't see any lasting damage. She stared at the geese. O Fortuna started playing in her imagination again. It isn't over, she said, shaking her head. They'll come for us when we least expect it. Jonah stood, limping. A goose hissed at him, and he jumped. Man, fuck this. Fuck geese.
That was terrifying, and my heart is pounding. Which is a good segue. So this is a thriller about a bunch of girls at a boarding school who are blackmailed, supposedly by a dead body, into ruining their own lives. Beneath the silvery moonlight, our skin gleams like bones. Skinny dipping in the frigid waters of North Lake after the Halloween dance is a Bates Academy tradition, though not many students have the guts to honor it. 3 years ago, I was the first freshman to not only jump, but stay under so long they thought I drowned. I didn't mean to. I jumped because I could, because I was bored, because one of the seniors had made fun of my pathetic dollar store costume, and I wanted to prove I was better than her. I kicked down to the bottom, pushing down past clumps of moss and silky strands of pondweed. And I stayed there, sunk my fingers into the soft, crumbling silt until my lungs twisted and convulsed. Because even though the freezing water cut like knives, it was soundless. It was peaceful. It was like being encased safely in a thick block of ice, protected from the world. I might have stayed if I could, but my body didn't allow it. I broke the surface, and the upper-class women screamed my name and passed me a bottle of flat champagne, and we scattered as campus police broke up the scene. That was my official arrival at Bates. It was my first time away from home, and I was no one. I was determined to redesign myself completely into a Bates girl, and as soon as I took that dive, I knew exactly what kind of girl I would be. The kind who jumps first and stays under 10 seconds too long. Now we're the seniors, and no first years have dared to tag along. My best friend, Bree Matthews, runs ahead, her sleek track star body cutting through the night air. Ty Carter runs just ahead of me, her hands pressed over her mouth to cram her laughter in. She's wearing a pair of angel wings, and they flutter with her, long silvery hair twisting in the wind. The rest of our group trails behind. I'm about to make the final sprint across the patch of dead moss stretching from Henderson's emergency exit to the edge of the lake when I hear Bree scream. Ty halts, and I push past her towards the sound of frenetic splashing. Bree's frantic voice escalates in pitch, repeating my name over and over, faster and faster. I tear through the bushes, thorns etching white and red stripes in my skin, grab her hands and haul her up out of the lake. Kay, she breathes into my neck, her body dripping, shivering violently, teeth clicking and chattering. My heart batters my rib cage as I look her over for blood or cuts. Her thick black hair lies damply over her skull. Her smooth brown skin, unlike mine, is unbroken. Then Ty grabs my hand so hard my fingertips go numb. Her face, usually caught between a genuine grin and mocking smirk, is arranged in a strange blank stare. I turn, and an odd sensation creeps over me, like my skin is turning to stone, one cell at a time. There's a body in the lake.
So my book Everless is a YA fantasy, and it takes place in a world where time is currency and can be bought and sold and hoarded and lost. And in this scene, the main character, Jules, is a servant at this palatial estate, the Everless estate, and she has brought a tea tray to the tower where the oldest person at Everless lives. What news do you bring? News, my lady? Useless girl, she spits, waving her hand as to bat away a fly. How long until the queen arrives? 2 days, my lady, I answer, having heard the frantic staff below flutter about the date. 1 month so the queen and Lady Gold can make preparations for the wedding, and then Rowan will be married on the eve of our spring. I remind myself that I have no claim on Rowan, none at all. And the girl? Rowan's girl? She'll arrive with the queen, my lady. Rowan's girl. My chest tightens at her words. I feel my face heat and hope Lady Sita won't notice it. None of the other children Her Majesty have adopted have lived long enough to take the throne, have they? What makes Rowan think this girl will be different, she mutters, returning her gaze to the window. I hesitate, unsure if I should ignore her mutterings or respond. It's true that the queen's adopted before. By historical accounts, one child died of the plague that swept through decades ago. Another in a raid in the palace, another by drowning. All before I was born. I don't care much for royal lineage or for anything to do with the palace. Papa always said that history and stories can't buy bread. But I am interested in the hint of accusation behind the elder girling's words, that the queen will never die and never pass on her throne. Feeling brave, I tell her, but the queen named Ina Gold her heir, my lady. Lady Sita narrows her eyes at me, a smile spreading like oil over her features. I say she eats their hearts to stay young. Her words hang in the air. I have no real love for the queen, but the wild accusation still makes my skin itch, like it's anticipating a blow. It smacks of madness, though Lady Sita does not seem mad. She's old, but her voice is firm, her mind intact. She's taunting me. As swiftly as possible, I set the tray down on the stand next to her and wait to be dismissed. But then she does something that chills me even more. She produces something glittering from her breast pocket. It takes me a moment to realize that it's a year coin, almost as wide as my palm in shining gold. A year of life. It takes everything in me to stop myself from seizing it from her withered hand and running back to the cottage to Papa. Stir this in, she says impatiently. Hurry before the tea gets cold. Hesitantly, I reach out. My hand trembles as I take the coin. The pulse in my own fingers feels as if it's coming from within the coin. All the life this little thing could give me. Give Papa. All the life it's already cost someone else. But the coin, so heavy and permanent in my hand, dissolves like honey when I slip it into the cup of tea. Lady Sita purses her weathered lips to the cup and takes a long, leisurely sip. I don't think I imagine the color that flows back into her cheeks. Not waiting to be dismissed, I curtsy before hurrying from the room, rattled by the image of the old woman's throat moving as the year entered her blood. Now, more than ever, the quickening of my heart at the mention of Rowan's name feels like a betrayal, of myself, of Crofton, of Papa. How can I still hold feelings for Rowan, who comes from a family who treats a year of life like a cube of sugar, whose family has destroyed mine and so many others?
Now, to turn this into a dystopian panel, what we've done is we've actually, that elevator over there only arrives once every like 5 or 6 minutes. We've locked all the other doors, and we are about to unleash 120 geese into the audience to see what happens. It's like Hunger Games times 12. It's really scary. Sorry, everyone. But I'm going to use that as a springboard. I'm going to shift over here so I can see you all. I apologize to those of you whose back I've now turned towards. But what strikes me, Krystal being the most explicit of you who's done this, but in very, very different ways, all of you engage in fear in some way in your books, that all of your characters have to, in the course of the book, wrestle with some fears that in many ways are specific to being a teenager, but also are ones that are relatable even to adults like ourselves. So I'm curious about just which fears you engaged with and how you approach that as a writer. Obviously, hopefully as an adult, you know a little bit more than your characters know, but sort of how do you get into the mindset of them, and also how do you set them on a journey to actually grapple with the fear rather than have it just exist? Who wants to start? Or Krystal, since you revolve your book around it, we can start with you.
I'll go first. I had 50 fears in my book, so I picked all of them.
But you read the scariest.
I read the scariest, for sure. I actually had a run-in with a goose when I was 9 years old, which directly inspired that section, so I am scared of geese myself. I think although there are a lot of fun and funny fears in this book, like there are geese and clowns and dolls, there are also the fears that you really grapple with as a teenager, like, you know, social anxiety and people judging you and being seen for something that you're not, and all of those things. So this, for me, was a really like direct way to address those things. So Esther keeps this list of all these ridiculous things she thinks she's afraid of, but ultimately, I think she fears what every teenager fears, and that is being judged, or, ultimately being judged, I guess, is the big one. And that's what she comes to understand about herself in the end, is just to be herself. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I was writing the first draft of this during the presidential election in 2016, and then revising it during the first year of this current administration. And something that I was grappling with in my own life was sort of personal fear, feeling kind of, and concerns and it's, you know, whatever kind of emotional things, feeling kind of silly and small in comparison to bigger, you know, scarier things that were happening in the broader world. And I think that is something that whether or not whoever's in power, whatever, but like that teenagers in particular have acutely, because a lot of times a lot of teenage emotion can be written off as sort of silly or overblown, or don't worry, it'll get better. All we can do is wait for it to get better, or whatever, But that stuff is real, and it happened, and we felt it. And I think that we shouldn't, kids hopefully, if they read this or any of these great books, like will realize that, like, yes, I will get older, things will change, but this matters right now, even though the whole world, doesn't really seem to care.
Well, in this trilogy specifically, it's told, like Ashley's book, it's told from 3 different perspectives, and it's 3 girls who are starting new lives in New York City, but they all are dealing with really scary situations from their past. And in the first book, they're kind of running away from those situations. It's not until this conclusion of the trilogy that they realize fear is always going to be there. You have to have the courage to overcome fear. Right, so the good kind of fear is when you get that tingly excitement that you want to follow your heart, and in the process of creating your dream life, you have to do certain things that are really scary. Like a lot of people stay in jobs they don't like because they're too afraid to really take that risk, and for good reasons, to really take that risk and say, I deserve happiness, I deserve to manifest my dream life. These girls are doing that, and Rosanna in particular, was autobiographical in a way for me, because she has moved to New York City to go to college. Oh, UNY, University of New York, first featured in Felicity. They live in the same summer housing that Felicity lived in. Okay, anyway. So she has no financial support from her parents. And so there's one scene in this trilogy, and this totally happened to me in college, where she's at the ATM taking out like $20 for the week so she can eat, and her balance, and I still have my receipt in my scrapbook that says this, 73 cents left. She's got 73 cents. And I remember just bawling at the ATM because I couldn't pick up the phone and call somebody and say I need money, like I was on my own. That is so scary to know that you have to find a way to survive. So I think in her case, she realizes that she has to keep moving forward. She can't, failure's not an option when you need desperately to create the life you want to be living. She refuses to go back to what she knew because it was too horrible. And I think my characters in general, they're all, overcoming fear in that way by saying, I deserve to be loved, I deserve to create my dream life. And that is a really scary process. But again, it's like the good fear is kind of like a sign pointing down this road saying, this is the road to go down. Because if you do, your life is going to improve immensely.
For those not born in the 90s, Felicity was a TV show featuring the mom from The Americans, playing a New York college student in a dorm room that was roughly 90 times the size of a normal dorm room. It also harkens back to a time when a main character on a television show cut her hair, and it was news. All right, Arvin, let's talk about the fear. Your character is so afraid.
I mean, so I'm actually gonna. It's kind of like a janky mic. Can you guys all hear me? Everyone hear me? Okay. So my character is afraid of the future. I mean, does anyone? I'm a child of the 2000s. Does anyone remember that song? It's really young. Does anyone remember that song, "The Future Freaks Me Out"? And okay, who was it again? Who sang that, or what band sang that? Okay, well that song was the anthem of my teen years. And I thought that it would get better in college. I would go to college and I would know exactly what I'm doing for the rest of my life. But then senior year of college, I got into this argument with my parents because I still wasn't sure. I knew I was going to work a tech job after graduation, but I was is this what I want to do for the next 40 years? I don't know. And of course, parents, especially immigrant parents, they want you to follow a path and stick with it. And I just did not have that stick-to-itiveness. And it brought me back to my teen years, and I felt the same sort of uncertainty, the same pressure from my parents, from my friends who knew since they were 5 that they were going to be a doctor, a teacher, and from college applications, when you get asked those questions, you're asked to pick a major. And so that's what my character is afraid of. He's afraid of having to decide and commit in this world that tries to force you on a path and maybe you just don't know. And I think you overcome this fear because you realize that like it's okay not knowing, and it's so hard, I think, to accept that, not just in your teenage years, but like in your 20s and your 30s and your 40s and all these other points in your life when you're coming of age and figuring it out. But all you can really do is go out and gain experiences, and those experiences, the people you meet, the crazy shit that happens, the things you like and you don't like, that's what ultimately informs the path that you choose to go down. So, fear of the future.
Mine, oh, I'm sorry, did you want to go? You can go. Are you sure? Okay. So mine is almost like the flip side of Arvin's in that, yes, on the surface level and beneath the surface, it's very much kind of like a Pretty Little Liars type story. But it's also a story about a character who just goes for it and decides on her future, decides on her path, and says, this is my way out of a home situation that I don't want to be in. And she goes forward and she puts it all in on this soccer scholarship that's going to be her future. And as soon as a wrench gets thrown in the works and she decides that she can't be that, she's hit with this incredible fear that just turns her life upside down. Because when she's put all of her stock into doing this one thing and she's convinced herself that there's only one way that her life can go, and that turns out not to be an option, it's about when you have to start looking at your life and reevaluating it. And so that's a whole different kind of fear. But it actually shares a lot of DNA with that kind of fear. And it's having to consider the fact that you may have been wrong about certain things. You may have been wrong about a lot of things. And the fact that things can't always be the way that you would like them to be and the way that you plan them to be. And I think that in a lot of ways, it's more like sometimes it's like an older teen type of moment in life, but it is very much, I think, like a kind of relatable teen kind of moment that happens. And it's just like a, oh my gosh, like stop, reverse kind of moment. And I don't know. There's no ending to this sentence. So I'm just going to stop it right there.
I think in my book, so there's 3 characters, and I think each character is dealing with sort of individual fears. For Autumn, she is really afraid of the feelings that she has for her best friend's older brother. And she's afraid of those feelings because the way that they came together, sort of the first moment that she was starting to realize her feelings for him, was the moment in which she felt like she should have been there for her friend and she wasn't. For Logan, he is afraid of sort of dealing with his feelings. He's just doing everything he can to avoid dealing with all the feelings he's feeling about his ex having passed away. And for Shay, who's the third character, she's really afraid of people realizing that there are sort of cracks in her armor. Her goal is to just make everybody think that she is fine, even though she isn't. But I think the sort of overarching fear in this book is my biggest fear, and that is losing someone that you feel like you can't live without. And then it's sort of figuring out how to live now that that person isn't there anymore. And so I hope that, teens who are going through that read this and they are able to, one, see that, the beauty remains. Like, there is beauty that is left over even when, like, the worst possible thing that you can imagine happens. And it is really scary and it is really hard. But, there's still so much more to life and so much more left, and it's okay to, like, not be okay and to be scared about those things.
Sure. Yeah, so for pretty obvious reasons, I guess, Everless deals with the fear of mortality. And I was really interested about what it would be like if we could conceptualize mortality in a more concrete way and say, I have 15 years left or 50 years left or whatever. And how does that affect the way people live their lives? And also, on a more personal level for the protagonist, her worst fear sort of comes true a few chapters into the book, and then she has to reinvent herself. So everyone else has articulated this more so than I could, but I think it's a really interesting YA concept, and something that a lot of us are dealing with is after your worst fear happens, where do you go from there, and how do you deal with that, and how do you sort of reinvent yourself?
Awesome. All right, next question. So I loved when Susane was talking about her book, she said autobiographical in a way. and that phrase is so apt to most of our writing. And so I'm actually going to try to not ask the obvious question of what is autobiographical in your book. But I'm curious, and again, not everyone has to answer this, but if it's true, like, were there autobiographical aspects you kept from the book? Were there things that you debated putting in, or were there things that you were looking at and you're like, oh, I didn't actually put myself in this at all, or in this way at all? Was there any holding back because it just didn't fit the story? Or is everything who is you in there?
Mine is, there's a lot of autobiography in it because I'm from Boston. It's very specific, a lot of last names of friends from high school and teachers and all that stuff. But I noticed in writing the first draft that I started kind of veering from the outline because I was like, well, no, but it happened this way. And then I had to like check myself and be like, no, you do this. This is not. You're not like just working through your own shit from high school. Like, yeah, it was therapeutic to write, but no, you guys don't need to read it. But what did stay in did ultimately prove. It's different from my lived experience in many ways, but like it still proved cathartic in helping me kind of process, unrequited love or whatever it was that I'm from high school that I was still kind of holding on to a little bit. So it was an interesting experiment in like crafting a version of my teenage years that were recognizable in sort of emotion and theme, but not necessarily exact detail.
Well, a fantasy book is obviously not autobiographical in any recognizable way. I drew on experiences and feelings a lot when I was coming up with the concept of time being money. Obviously, that's an idiom that we have in our world. And when I was first sort of starting to draft this, I was working a couple different jobs and trying to do the like make it in New York thing. And it's kind of interesting when you're working some sort of wage job and your time is literally, you're told it's worth like $12 or $15 or whatever an hour. How does that influence the decisions you make and how you spend your days and what you choose to focus on? And while I fortunately never had to make any decisions like the ones Jules makes in Everless, it did affect sort of my general outlook on when I woke up every day, what I was going to do, and that really informed the characters in here and what they choose to do with their lives. And yeah.
I think that I was really bad at not putting myself into the book, which is why there are 3 characters. So I sort of spread myself around a little bit. I wouldn't say that there's anything there's not a ton that is directly autobiographical to my life, but there is a lot of me, I would say, in each of my characters. And I think that I was a little nervous about making a character too similar to myself, which is why I put, a little bit of like my angst into Logan, a little bit of my sort of sweetness, I guess, into Autumn, and then like my love of music is in Shay. And so I sort of like spread the love around.
So one of my 3 great fears did not make it to the book. Many of my other fears did make it. I was telling these guys earlier that my 3 great fears in life are heights, caves, because I watched The Descent in my teenage years and it ruined caving for me forever. But one of, the big one that didn't make it to the book was frogs. So I'm terrified of frogs. A frog jumped at my face once and it has scarred me forever. But everything else I'm afraid of is in there. So it's a very soul-bearing book, but alas, frogs.
All right, next question. For those of you who wrote about love, and most of you in some way wrote about love. I'm curious about how you approach a teenage love story, and sort of how do you tell something that feels real, and how do you bring your own perspective, again, as an adult, to the love story and how you construct it?
Well,
Sounds like you were looking at me when you said that.
so it's so funny because when I started writing, so my first book came out in 2006. And actually, we should point this out, right? That everyone, this is Krystal's second book, debut, right? So this is a really interesting panel. And I think that, when I first started writing, I didn't know that I was writing teen romance. Like, I didn't know that was a fit. I don't read romance books, or I didn't set out I'm gonna write teen, I was just writing about the things I felt passionate about. And my main goal really was to hopefully inform my readers that everyone deserves love, that you deserve the love you want to find, that you should not settle for a love that does not make you happy. And so when I write about love, which apparently, so Barnes & Noble, right, they created this teen romance section a few years ago, and they put all my books in it, and I had, one of those, what you call it, not end cap, what do you call the little label on the little label, shelf talker, teen romance by Susane Colasanti. I was like, okay, whatever's working, right? But it's really, because all of my books incorporate issues that I've dealt with, that I was a high school science teacher for 10 years back in the day, that I saw my students dealing with every day, that I know, need to be really addressed and spoken about in YA Lit. And so, but yeah, I always have sort of a love story because I feel like that's so integral for teens to know that it doesn't matter what you're envisioning for your life. It doesn't have to be normal. It doesn't it doesn't have to be what society tells you needs to be. You need to be who you are, whoever that is, and really accept that and know that you deserve to be loved in the way you want to be, because I did not think anyone was ever going to love me. That's how I felt. And so I want my readers to know that not only do they deserve to be loved, and they will be loved, but just not to settle for less than what you want, and also love. I write about soulmates because I feel like a soulmate is someone you have chemistry and connection with, and there's more than one soulmate for everybody, right? In Kissing Jessica Stein, she said there's 7. I've met 3 so far in my life. That's a soulmate, but it doesn't mean perfection, because I write about this kind of soulmate love because I want readers to feel what it's like when you have that connection and you feel like you've always known someone forever and you just met them and you're just like, this is crazy, right? Because that's real, but it doesn't mean it's freaking perfect. And not all soulmates are meant to be together. So I think it's important to show also the reality of love.
I want to piggyback off of that. I think it's really interesting that you brought up soulmates because I definitely believe in soulmates, and I think that all the characters in my book have sort of a soulmate connection with one or more than one person in their world. And for me, I really wanted to write not just about there are romantic relationships, but friendship was also really important to me to write about, and to sort of show that the relationships that people have with whoever their soulmate is, it can be platonic, it can be romantic, and sometimes it can be a mix of both. And so Autumn, her best friend died, and she's having a really hard time sort of being without this person because this person was such a big deal to her, and this person was basically her soulmate. And there is a little bit of romanticism a lot of the time in platonic friendships, especially if they're really close. And so I wanted to explore that, but I also, what's interesting to me about love stories is not always the way that people get together, but what is keeping them apart. And so I really wanted to play with that a little bit. of course, like my natural inclination is I just want everybody to be together and be happy. But it's more interesting when there is some kind of tension between two characters, whether they're friends, whether they're romantic partners or whatever. And so all the romance in my book has sort of some kind of tension. With Autumn and Dante, it is like the fact that she feels like she was with him when she should have been with her friend. Shay is sort of just making out with this guy that she likes, but she is avoiding having a conversation with him that would cement them into anything more solid than just like make out buddies. And with Logan, he's really dealing with the fact that he's still in love with this person who he had this horrible breakup with and never sort of got an opportunity to make it right. And so there are all these relationships and all these connections, and then there's all the stuff that's keeping these people apart. And I think those things are equally important and equally complicated, especially when you're a teenager and you're still figuring out how a lot of that stuff works. Like when it's your first relationship or your first real friendship, or your first real breakup. Like all that stuff is really hard and complicated to figure out the first time around.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off that because, so for me, I didn't explore really romantic love. I was exploring like love, I think, from the perspective of family. Like some of my favorite love stories are like Colasanti's books, which is like part of why it was like, just like mind-boggling that he like, like we had this like beautiful blurb from him on the book. But no, I mean, like it's like those books are about, familial love and friendship love and love of country, these other forms of love that are really interesting. And so for me, I had this teenager with immigrant parents who love him very, very much, but are putting pressure on him. And of course, as a teen, when that happens, you sort of push back and you're like, why are you doing this to me? And yeah, I mean, that was really interesting. It's really interesting to me because I think that's something where like with your family, like they're sort of like, they're your day ones, right? They're like the people who were there from the beginning, probably some of the first people you get really, really sick of and like start to hate, but then you come around because for the most part, like you're stuck with them. They're the one relationship that the world tells you, like that the world like forces upon you, and then it's on you to either keep it going or not. And so that was interesting to me to explore this like immigrant and son of immigrant familial love. And yeah, I mean, when I think about like romantic love, like that wasn't really a big piece of like my teenage years. And I think part of it is, of course, like the repression of being closeted. Like I was not out as a teenager. And so that just wasn't an option in my mind. In my mind, the options were like, I'm allowed to love my family, I'm allowed to love my friends, and I'm allowed to like love the work that I'll eventually do. And even as an adult, I actually think that like romantic love, like I would of course love like to ultimately like have a husband and kids and stuff, but like I don't think that's necessarily necessary. My kind of like, I heard this a few years ago and it really stuck with me that like sort of the way to live a fulfilled life, it's like threefold. It's to have sort of work that you love, people around you that you love, and to leave something for the future generations. And I think that's interesting because it like leaves for a lot of like different ways of living a life, like future generations that can mean kids, but can also mean teaching or volunteer work. People that you love, it can mean like friendship, or it can mean a partner, or it can mean all these different things. And of course, you should be doing things on like a day-to-day basis that hopefully you are passionate about. So that's what I was ultimately interested in. It was, this kid who's grappling with his parents, who he knows he's supposed to love and who love him, but it just doesn't make sense. And of course, trying to find that passion, something that he cares about deeply and will do for the rest of his life. He just doesn't know it yet. So yeah, it's a different kind of love.
A term I learned on one of my ill-advised tours of Goodreads was insta-love. And this was something I'd never heard before. I didn't really know what it was, but I kind of figured it out. And people on Goodreads seemed very concerned about that. And they said that my book does not have it, so I don't know if that's good or bad.
That's good.
But clearly that topic is on people's mind and is not always, obviously, but can often be germane to, or like really like central in young adult fiction. And so I guess the only way I could do it was in a way that felt accurate to me was, again, to sort of mine my own, well, frankly, this is sort of my own fantasy of how things would have gone, minus one major detail, but, and just try to be truthful and really to write it in a way that felt realistic to me now. I'm in my mid-30s. I just don't really think that you're interior sort of emotional register changes that much, you know. You know more about the world. Experience has helped shape you some, but like having a crush on someone is having a crush on someone. And I think the more honest you are, even if it reads a little more complicated than your typical 17-year-old's, you know, first love or whatever, I think that the authenticity is there, and it's not insta love.
But I don't think that's necessarily like a teen versus adult thing. Like, I'm gonna take a wild guess and say that you're a T on the Myers-Briggs scale, T to F. I don't know.
Now shit's getting personal.
Now we're getting personal. But no, I know, because I'm a total T, and I don't really believe in insta love or like all these like.
I'm an F.
You're an F, and I knew that. I knew that actually as soon as you said you believe in soulmates, because I don't believe in soulmates. Like, I think there are like multiple people I could like end up. And so I think like it's not just like you're young and not like I didn't believe in insta love as a teenager, and I don't believe in it now, you know. And like these suddenly I realized moments like that's not to me. I think it's like it's easy to sort of look back and be like that's the moment that I knew. But like that's usually not how it happens, I think. But for some people, I think it is maybe. Or like
It might happen to you more if you didn't lead with what is your Myers-Briggs.
Can you guys tell that I am a total like thinking on the scale of thinking versus feeling? Like I got that test result and I was like, oh my god, my apartment is fascinating. Like all the way on one. And which is why my friends are like, how do you write books? Like these are like emotion filled.
Wait. So you know I have to ask at least something
Okay.
regarding the soulmate statement, right? Like, I'm just so curious. So you don't believe that it's just, okay.
You're an F too.
People,
I
okay.
believe in emotions. And I think
Yes.
there's a logical argument to make for emotions. I don't think robots, I'm really fascinated by AI and robots, but I think humans should continue because like we are emotional beings, and so like it makes sense to love, but like it has to make sense to me.
Arvin,
Okay,
let Susane speak.
but do you think that maybe
Straight into therapy.
You've never
maybe
someone and it felt like you knew them before?
you never met someone? Wait, so you never met someone and like right away you feel chemistry and you feel this
The
connection
computer,
that's
Susane.
like
But it's not for sure. I've had that. Like the best date of my life so far turned out to be like some really weird person who introduced me to his family on like the 4th date. You know, maybe because it was such a good first date.
Maybe
but, like,
he was your soulmate and you shot him down.
You know.
Poor guy.